The Amish do not preserve food the way most people think they do. They do not have a single trick. They have a complete system that addresses the four variables that determine whether food spoils, and once you understand those four variables, the specific techniques become obvious. The techniques, the four variables that control all food spoilage. The four variables that control spoilage are temperature, oxygen, moisture, and acidity. Bacteria, mold, and yeast that cause food to spoil require a specific range of all four to survive and reproduce. Refrigeration addresses only one of those variables by lowering temperature below the range that most spoilage organisms require. The Amish system addresses all four simultaneously across different food categories using techniques that require no electricity and no manufactured inputs beyond salt, vinegar, and a few other basic materials. Understanding this is the prerequisite to understanding why the techniques work rather than just knowing what they are. Every preservation failure in any food storage system, whether a jar of canned beans that goes bad, a root vegetable that rots, or a piece of cured meat that spoils before its time, can be traced back to one or more of these four variables being inadequately controlled. Learning to think in these terms, rather than in terms of specific recipes, is what separates someone who can improvise preservation solutions from someone who can only follow instructions. Technique 1. Root cellaring. Root cellaring is the foundational, non-refrigeration storage method for fresh produce, and it works because the soil temperature at a depth of 6 to 8 feet below the frost line in most of the continental United States remains between 32 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, which is well within the safe storage range for most root vegetables without any mechanical cooling at all. Potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, parsnips, winter squash, cabbage, and apples all store for 6 to 12 months in a properly constructed root cellar without any preservation treatment whatsoever beyond placing them in the space. The Amish root cellar design involves a north-facing entry to minimize warm air penetration, ventilation channels to control humidity between 80 and 95%, depending on the crop, and specific layering in sand, straw, or sawdust for individual root vegetables that prevents them from touching each other and allows any beginning rot to be contained rather than transmitted. The soil temperature stability that makes root cellaring work is not unique to rural farmsteads. Technique 2. Lacto-fermentation. Lacto-fermentation is the technique the Amish apply to vegetables that cannot be root cellared effectively, and it works by creating an acidic environment through the metabolic activity of naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria that are present on the surface of all fresh vegetables. When vegetables are submerged in a brine of approximately 2% salt by weight and kept at temperatures between 65 and 75 degrees, the lactobacillus bacteria produce lactic acid as a byproduct of consuming the vegetable's natural sugars, and that lactic acid drops the pH of the fermentation vessel to a level where pathogenic bacteria, including the organisms responsible for botulism, listeria, and salmonella, cannot survive. Sauerkraut made through this process stores for 1 to 2 years in a cool cellar without any canning, sealing, or heat treatment. Fermented cucumbers, beets, green beans, and mixed vegetable preparations follow the same basic chemistry and achieve similar storage life at similar temperatures. The safety record of lactofermentation over thousands of years of documented use across virtually every traditional food culture in the world is one of the strongest arguments for its reliability as a preservation method. Technique 3. Salt curing and smoking. Salt curing is how the Amish preserve meat for long periods without refrigeration, and the technique is one of the oldest and most thoroughly documented food preservation methods in human history. The mechanism is straightforward. Sodium chloride at sufficient concentration draws water out of bacterial cells through osmosis, inhibiting or killing the organisms responsible for meat spoilage before they can multiply to dangerous levels. Dry cured pork, which involves packing fresh pork cuts in salt and allowing the cure to penetrate the tissue over several weeks, produces a product that can be stored at cool cellar temperatures for 6 months to a year. Brine-cured meats submerged in a salt solution strong enough to float an egg, known as a saturated brine, achieve similar results through a different physical process. The Amish smoking process applied after salt curing adds a second layer of preservation through the antimicrobial compounds in wood smoke, primarily phenols and aldehydes, that penetrate the meat surface and further inhibit microbial growth. Modern food scientists studying traditional preservation methods have confirmed through pathogen testing that properly salt-cured and smoked meats are safe at room temperature for the duration concentrations traditional practitioners claimed, and the antimicrobial properties of wood smoke compounds have been measured and validated in laboratory conditions. Technique 4. Pressure canning. Pressure canning is the technique that bridges the Amish traditional food preservation system with a modern safety standard, and it is the only safe home method for preserving low-acid foods, including meats, beans, corn, and most vegetables that are not pickled or fermented. The USDA home canning guidelines, which represent the most rigorously tested set of preservation protocols available for home use, specify that low-acid foods must be processed in a pressure canner at 15 pounds per square inch for time periods ranging from 75 to 90 minutes for quart jars of meat, depending on the specific food. This temperature and pressure combination destroys Clostridium botulinum spores that survive boiling water temperatures and that can produce the botulinum toxin in sealed anaerobic environments. The Amish run pressure canners in large batches during harvest season, processing meat, poultry, and vegetables that then store safely on a pantry shelf for 2 to 5 years without refrigeration. The USDA's pressure canning guidelines are available as free publications at extension.org and through the National Center for Home Food Preservation, which is funded by the USDA and represents the definitive reference for home canning safety in the United States. Technique 5. Water glass egg preservation. Water glass preservation, using a solution of sodium silicate or slaked lime mixed with water, is the genuinely forgotten technique that most people outside traditional food preservation circles have never encountered. And it is one of the most effective methods for extending the storage life of fresh eggs without refrigeration. Fresh eggs coated in the water glass solution and stored in a sealed crock have the pores in their shells sealed against the air and bacteria that cause spoilage, and eggs stored this way have been documented to remain edible for 12 to 18 months at room temperature in historical records and in modern testing by food preservation researchers. The sodium silicate solution is available from feed supply stores and some online retailers, and the process requires nothing beyond mixing the solution at the correct dilution, submerging fresh unwashed eggs, and storing the sealed crock in a cool location. This single technique addresses the most challenging protein storage problem in a non-refrigeration context. Historical documentation of water glass egg preservation appears in American agricultural extension publications from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when this was a standard farmstead practice across rural America before rural electrification made refrigeration accessible. Technique 6. Lard preservation. Lard preservation, sometimes called potting or confiting, involves cooking meat until fully done and then submerging it in enough rendered lard or tallow to completely cover the surface before sealing the container. The fat forms a physical barrier that excludes oxygen from the meat surface, and without oxygen, the aerobic bacteria responsible for meat spoilage cannot survive. This is chemically identical to the French duck confit technique and the traditional English potted meat preparations that were standard preservation methods before mechanical refrigeration existed. Properly potted meat stored in a cool location can remain safe to eat for 6 months to a year, and the Amish application involves pork, chicken, and game that is processed during slaughter season and stored through the winter without any canning equipment required beyond the jar or crock and the rendered fat. The lard preservation technique requires that the meat be fully cooked through before potting, that the fat used is clean rendered fat without water contamination that would create pockets of moisture within the seal, and that the sealed container is stored in a location where ambient temperature does not exceed approximately 60 degrees Fahrenheit consistently. Technique 7. Dry storage with oxygen absorbers. Dry storage with oxygen absorbers and mylar bags is the modern evolution of the principle the Amish applied through clay jar storage and sealed tin containers, and it extends the practical shelf life of dry goods, including grains, legumes, and powdered foods, from the 1 to 3 years typical of pantry storage to the 25 to 30 years confirmed by Brigham Young University food storage research. The oxygen absorber packet removes virtually all oxygen from the sealed mylar bag, creating an anaerobic environment that prevents the oxidation of fats and the aerobic microbial growth that degrades stored dry goods over time. The principle is identical to what the Amish achieved with beeswax sealed clay jars, simply more effective because modern packaging materials achieve a more complete oxygen exclusion than any traditional container could. The Amish practice of storing grains, dried beans, and cornmeal in sealed containers in cool locations reflects the same underlying understanding that oxygen and moisture are the enemies of long-term dry food storage. The modern Mylar bag and oxygen absorber system achieves in minutes what the Amish achieved through careful sealing and cool storage over longer periods. And the two approaches are not mutually exclusive. The refrigerator solved a problem people were already solving without it. Every technique here predates electricity by centuries and works as reliably today as it did then. Subscribe for the next video on building a root cellar equivalent in a modern home without digging anything.